Death End Request is a JRPG where the ambition is sadly only matched by an inability to execute ideas with grace. Although the game is primarily a JRPG, there's enough visual novel content, at times segments trailing over an hour in length, that I would also consider this to be something of a hybrid. And we're going to jump straight into this and take a look at where the game could have excelled and what ultimately dragged it back for me. But before we get too deep into any of this game's mechanics, let's take a look at the story. So stop me if any of this sounds familiar, but in Death End Request we primarily play as Sheena, a girl with amnesia. She is stuck inside an MMO that mysteriously just had its servers reactivated. Sheena, however, is infected with something of a virus, which introduces a sort of ticking time bomb plot element to the story. Sheena, like the world around her, is corrupted by bugs, or rather glitches of a sort. These bugs threaten the existence of the entire MMO world around her, and the existence of anybody plugged into the game. It's the typical if you die in the game, you die in real life sort of plot. If Sheena wants to survive, she needs to find a way to beat the game and get herself out. Luckily for Sheena, somebody named Mizunashi signs online who claims to have known her from the days when the game was originally active. He claims that Sheena in the real world was a high-profile woman who had mysteriously disappeared. So Mizunashi sets himself to helping Sheena beat the game, while simultaneously in the real world he works through the mystery of her disappearance and the sudden reactivation of the MMO's servers. You will periodically switch between Mizunashi and Sheena at different points to progress the plot, but there isn't really any gameplay in Mizunashi's portions. It's merely clicking to different points on the real world's map and talking to people, while making the occasional dialogue choice. And just a quick note here, anytime a dialogue option comes up, make a new save. 50% of the dialogue options end in a game over, and they do warn you at the start of the game to keep multiple save files, and it is a darn good warning to heed. So yeah, this plot introduction is filled with rather trite and overused tropes we've seen in many games and anime before, but it would be an understatement to say that it goes places beyond this. If anything, the plot goes too many places. It introduces so many different plot elements and threads that don't naturally seem like they would belong until we end up with a confused mess of a story that doesn't know what it wants to be and is too convoluted to take seriously. In a way, kind of like Kingdom Hearts. It's a neat idea they have going on switching between the two different worlds to progress, but most of the time it feels like the plot developments are happening randomly and nonsensically, and only for the sake of making the game last longer. At about 40 hours in length, I feel this would have been a much better experience had they chopped the story in half and just told something on a much smaller scale, as the scale of the world doesn't lend itself to 40 hours of gameplay. Which brings me to something I want to hit on before we jump into the combat. The level design and variety. Boy, could this ever use some work. Though it seems promising at first, leaving your introduction area and stepping out into a lush, bright, and green environment, this is about the best the game looks all the way through. From here, we visit one generic biome after another, all of which look incredibly devoid of life and creativity, which is a fact only amplified by how few locations Death End actually contains and how many times you'll have to revisit them all. Just for study, let's take a look at the castle. It's nothing but large open rooms and hallways. Enemies are sprinkled around with no rhyme or reason. Whoever lives here must have broke the bank just building the structure too, because they seem to have not had enough money left over to furnish even a single room. There's not even wall decorations. There's nothing in any of these locations. They're just bland. To make matters worse is the actual stage design in terms of how you progress through them. Most areas in the game contain several locked or barred areas wherein you need to find the right key or item to unlock the next area to progress. However, it's not uncommon to have 5 or 10 locked passages available to you at any time. When you gain a key to unlock a door, the key descriptions are more often than not completely useless when it comes to letting you know which door it unlocks. So you'll be forced to retread the entire dungeon and visit every corner, testing every door over and over again every time you get a new key. Add on top of this other small frustrations like limited save points, overpopulated enemies, passages that are blocked off just to make traversal take longer, and exploring becomes a huge source of frustration. And what's worse, when you do reach the final locked door in many of these places, it's simply locked. You approach and nothing happens. No cutscene or anything. So you just end up retreading old ground to see if you missed a key or something, only to find out later you're supposed to switch back to the real world and progress the story more with Mizunashi before you can continue, but nobody told you. This isn't how you do stage progression, but for what it's worth, I do feel level design is where the game fails the absolute hardest, so the darkest part of this review is behind us. And while yes, the story is trite at first and convoluted later, there are actually fun little plot elements here and there, and the characters, while also generic, can give you something to hang on to. So from here, we're going to look at what's by far the most complicated part of the game, and where the ambition and the execution are the most inconsistent. Let's take a look at Death and Request's incredibly unique battle system. So this is a turn-based JRPG, but it's anything but traditional. Of course, some traditional elements still apply, such as your items, weapons, and accessory equips, HP and SP meters, but beyond this, it's quite unique. How battle starts depends on how you approach enemies in the stages. If you get taken by surprise, you start at a disadvantage, which is probably balanced a little too steep towards the hard side, where scrubs can sometimes wipe your entire party from full in a single turn. But if you strike an enemy before battle starts, you start with the advantage, and if you simply engage them, then the battle is on neutral terms. When battles start, you enter an arena separate from the main world. On your turn, you can do a number of things. You can move anywhere within the arena on your turn. From a list of skills, you can cast 3 skills on a single turn at a cost to your SP, or you can choose to just guard, use items, or use 3 standard attacks. Attacks all have different areas of effect and ranges, so positioning your characters is actually important. The skills have a neat function where mixing and matching them, or doubling and tripling up on the same skill, can give you a chance to learn new skills, so the game encourages you to try new attack combinations, and this is definitely a welcome feature. Unfortunately, you can only bring so many skills into battle, and managing your skills on the menu outside of battle is a bit of a cumbersome endeavor, as there's no decent skill comparison window when deciding what to add or remove. But it is a good idea nonetheless. Just like most things in this game, execution can use some work. Using 3 standard attacks will cause enemy knockback, and knockback is a big part of battle. Knocking enemies back into your teammates will cause them to counterattack them and keep the knockback chain going. If an enemy is knocked into a wall or another enemy, they get massive damage dealt to them. In a way, this reminds me a bit of the bowling mechanic in the 3DS game Lords of Magna, though it feels a bit more like air hockey or something here. It's a neat function, but the camera often has a hard time keeping up with the motion of it all, and it's a bit hard to keep track of and a bit of a mess to look at. Scattered around the floor in these arenas are something called field bugs. Different colored field bugs have different effects, where if you walk over some, you may stun yourself, and some others may even heal your SP, though most will certainly cause you damage. If an enemy in knockback hits a field bug, they will not take any damage, but it will instead add to their corruption level, which will gradually boost their stats. The girls will also have their corruption go up by hitting field bugs, and this is a bit of a double-edged sword. If you accidentally hit 100% corruption, then the character will die, but at 80% you enter a powered up state that gives you access to your most powerful moves. Additionally, if you manage to clear 50% of the field bugs in the arena, then Mizunashi can give you aid from the outside world by injecting new code into the game. Mizunashi's help comes in many different varieties, but he can only act once every time you get to 50% field bugs or lower. He can do simple things like lower enemy or party corruption levels, or summon previously defeated bosses to battle alongside you. He can also do more complicated things like inject new code that changes the genre of the game. This is one of the more unique things about the battle system and something the game kind of sells itself on. Mizunashi can turn battle essentially into a first-person shooter, a game of slots, pool, a side-scroll fighter, and more. And while this is a cool idea, man, these are just not fun. They feel like mini-games from some freeware Nintendo Wii game, but possibly even worse. The execution, again, is just poor. The first-person shooter bit is just standing still, aiming poorly, and shooting 3 times. Well, does this even count as a first-person shooter? I mean, the scope fills the whole screen like it would in a first-person shooter, but you can still see the firing character. So, I don't know, it's a first and third-person shooter? Fourth-person shooter? Whatever. The fighter is just moving forward and hitting attacks until your power runs out. I don't even think the enemy can fight back in these moments. Slots is just slots. I mean, it adds some variety, and variety would be a good step in the right direction, but I guess it's more like this. Imagine you're standing on a sidewalk. Right in front of your feet is a small puddle of mud. A normal step will get you over it no problem. Unfortunately, Death End Request only takes a half step and gets itself all dirty. Sure, it's closer to its destination now, but it isn't arriving there clean anytime soon. This is disappointing because there's so many cool ideas here that could really make this fun, but it just falls flat. In terms of difficulty, barring 2 boss fights and the disadvantaged battles, the game is incredibly easy on standard difficulty. However, battles tend to drag far longer than necessary, which by the end makes them incredibly discouraging to bother with. After beating the game and getting a normal ending, I went back, dropped the game to easy, and beat the final boss again to unlock one of the character endings, and found the battle system much more fun on easy. Sure, I was incredibly overpowered, but the build of the game on easy seemed to make it much easier to take advantage of special attacks, corruption states, and your attacks with Mizunashi. Just having that added level of accessibility made battle feel way more open and varied. Nothing could fix the controls or wonkiness of the minigames or anything, but at least battles were much faster and fluid this way. There's a little more to the battle system, but they're small things that won't really make or break anybody's experience with this game. So from here, before we close out, for those of you who are still interested, let's take a look at some of the technical aspects of Death End Request. So first off, let's acknowledge this game had the sense to ship with dual audio. Not a lot of the game is voiced, but enough of it is to warrant acknowledging it. The voice casting in both languages is mostly good, though I did find Mizunashi's English voice actor, though not bad, maybe had to take his lines more seriously than they deserved, and it just felt a little unfitting to me. Perhaps even a bit forced. Some parts later on, when some of the female voice actors have to scream and sound in anguish, they kinda dropped the ball, but those moments are few and far between. There's not much in the way of world chatter while roaming around, but what's here gets annoying quickly, where the girls pant and run out of breath constantly. The music didn't quite do it for me, but there was one area where I was rather feeling it, where the OST felt kind of like Nier Automata light. Sound effects, when they're not just average, are unfortunately pretty bad, like they were lifted straight out of an old Warner Brothers or Hanna-Barbera cartoon. While those sound effects themselves aren't bad, there's a time and place to use them, and this game is neither the time nor the place. The 2D art I really enjoyed, as it's clearly in the exact same vein as Mary Skelter Nightmares. With that, however, comes this feeling that I've seen most of these designs before. And with some enemies, that's far more than just a feeling. In my previous review for Omega Quintet, I showed how Mary Skelter Nightmares and Omega Quintet reused assets by just slightly reskinning enemy designs. Death End Request does this as well. The designs themselves aren't usually bad or anything, but if you played many Compile Heart Idea Factory games before, don't expect to see much new here in terms of enemies. Control doesn't feel terrible, but some things like jumping are rather stiff, and the camera doesn't always know how to react to the environment. The translation is actually pretty good, but once or twice it didn't actually match the spoken dialogue. The load screens are abundant and pretty lengthy, but performance is otherwise good. Outside of all of this, there's not much else to touch on. Death End Request is a unique and ambitious, low-budget JRPG that executes its great ideas with the grace of a bird flying into a glass door. The story is trite but goes places. Too many places for my taste, but places nonetheless. It's repetitive, inconsistent in its balance, and visually uninspired, but at the very least, it was an interesting experiment. So, in the end, I'm sadly disappointed with this one. And it's a shame too, because this was one of the games I was most looking forward to this year. Following the gem that was Mary Skelter Nightmares, I had convinced myself that maybe this company had turned a corner, and that the quality of their average games was going to go up. That's something I was mistaken to feel. I myself always love looking into new, different, and inventive things. That's why I cover so many of the games that I do on this channel. But this one for me just fell flat. There's lots of great ideas here, and I think if they executed them better, balanced the game, fixed some of the inconsistencies, fixed that god-awful level design, we might have had something great. If anybody out there watching this does get the game and you do like it, there's a whole bunch of planned DLC coming for you, so support for this game isn't dying off anytime soon. Hopefully, some of you enjoy this much more than I did. In brief moments, it really does all come together and feel spectacular, but those moments are really brief. Maybe other people will feel those moments more often than I did, but as it is, this is what it was like for me. And that's all I'm gonna say on Death End Request. If you guys found this video helpful or useful at all, you know the deal. Like, comment, subscribe, share the video if you can. If you really like the content, consider supporting the show on Patreon. As always, folks, thanks for watching.